In the last video in this series, the Mahogany Clock Part 5, I bored you to tears while I painted this dial board. Well, anyway, I let it sit for a couple hours, and when I came back down to my workshop, this is what I found. Wow, I hadn't expected it to warp that much. It was pretty much an easy fix. I just painted the other side with water, and I waited about an hour, I think. And then I weighted it down and let it sit overnight. Next morning, it was fine. After a light sanding, I gave it a second coat with that primer, only this time I held it down so it wasn't going to warp again. I've been giving the pendulum disc a lot of thought, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and put a mahogany ring just around the outside of the brass bob. I think it'll look a lot nicer. From the mahogany that was left over, I cut off a little piece of wood here that was about the right size for the disc. And I'm just rounding everything off here, and that way it'll work a lot better on the lathe. I've done this twice before, and it looks quite nice, and it's actually quite fun to do. And hey, that's what this is all about, having fun. I think I mentioned earlier in one of the videos that this mahogany has a very powdery dust. And having a good dust collection system here I think is a really good idea, especially with this wood. You know, this is the only disc that I have of this size. I have smaller ones and I have bigger ones, but I wanted to use this one. And if I let it go, it's going to get sucked in, go through my dust collector. I'm going to be on the phone to Craft Time Clockery. Please send me another disc ASAP. That's a pretty good fit there. And like I've said before, I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. Now, if this disc was going to be going onto a mechanical movement, it wouldn't matter if it was a little bit on the heavy side, but it's going onto an electric movement, so I want to get it as light as possible. So I'm going to remove as much of the mahogany wood as I can, and this is an easy way to do it. Now, I know that nobody is going to see the back of the pendulum disc anyway, but I want to round it over. At least that way in my mind it looks nice. And as you can see, I do everything really high-tech. And here again, I don't want to let go of this either, or it's going to get sucked up the pipe. There now, doesn't that look a lot nicer? I'm diluting down the first coat of urethane here because I want it to soak into that mahogany really good. It may act as a bit of a glue and it might help to strengthen it a bit. I think this looks really nice. It matches perfectly the rest of the clock. After a little bit of careful sanding, and 2, possibly 3 more coats of urethane, it'll be ready to have the bob glued into place. Okay, about 2 weeks has passed now, and I think it's about time to try and glue that bob into place. I've put another probably 3 or 4 coats of urethane on here, and it's about as glossy as it's going to get. It's not going to take very much epoxy here. There's not a whole lot of stress going on. The pendulum rod has also had about 5 or 6 coats of urethane, and I think it looks as good as it's going to get as well. I think if I scuff up the surfaces where the glue is going to go, it'll hold a little better. Now I gotta be careful not to put on too much glue here, or it's going to be running down where it's not wanted. Now I know that nobody's going to be viewing the pendulum from the back anyway. However, I thought I may as well just cover up those scuff marks that the sandpaper made. The pendulum is basically done now. I just have to cut the pendulum rod to the right length. I better make sure I don't cut it too short. I can always cut it shorter, but I can't cut it longer. And just a little adjustment here on the hook that goes onto the movement. And that's it. The pendulum is finished. I think using that real mahogany was a good idea here. It just perfectly matches the rest of the case. This is the back of the new dial board, and I think just one coat is all that's going to be necessary here. It doesn't have to have a high gloss shine. It just has to be the same color as the rest of the case, and as you can see, it is. About 2 weeks has passed now, and I've designed and printed out a new dial, and I did the Envirotex thing again, the same as before, and now it's time to cut this dial down to size. Now I know that my fine-tooth melamine blade will probably do a better job cutting through this Envirotex, but I'm kind of lazy and I have a tendency to just want to leave on my combination blade. But I thought, well, why don't I just time myself and see just how long it actually takes to change the blade. So okay, the next time I'm feeling lazy, I just have to tell myself, hey, it only takes about 4 minutes. Now if you watched the Mahogany Clock number 5 and you managed to get to the end of it, I would have said that there was going to be a surprise and I'd let you know in this video. Well, now it's time for the surprise. I think you've probably already seen it. This clock, right from the very beginning, was intended to be a wedding gift for my son and his lovely bride. Well, those dials that you saw were just sort of, well, they were practice dials, but they were also decoys, so that it wouldn't give away the surprise. Well, I think I've got it cut about the size it has to be here, except for on the bottom. I may have to take off about another 1/16 of an inch. I didn't want to accidentally cut it too short like I did the last one. It's all trimmed down to the right size, and there's a hole drilled through for the hand shaft, and it's just a case of mounting it on the frame here. And the movement's in place, and I'm just squaring it up to the dial board. And once again, I want to block it so that it doesn't twist around when a person's putting batteries in it. And I'm not going to use those big clunky pieces of spruce like I did last time. I want to use something a little bit more delicate here. This real mahogany is going to look a lot better. Remember earlier in this video I mentioned how varathane will turn to jelly after a while? Well, it wasn't like this about 3 days ago, but look at it now. Underneath that skin there was a little bit of almost like molasses varathane, and I was able to dilute it down with some solvent, at least enough that I was able to get enough to darken these little pieces of mahogany here so that they matched everything else. Okay, remember that old dial board? Doesn't this look a lot better? Well, we finally come to the end of this mahogany clock. It's just a case now of wiping it down, get all the fingerprints off it, go over the glass with some Windex, and get it over to the happy couple. And I sure hope they like it. Now if you watched the Mahogany Clock number 5, you should recall that at the end of it, I said I was going to include some pictures of quartz battery movement clocks that I had made. And this first picture is a mechanical movement, but it's such a nice little clock I thought I'd show it to you anyway. All the rest of them are quartz battery movement clocks that I made, probably over the last 20-25 years. Most of these little clocks that you see here were pretty inexpensive to build, but they were a lot of fun to build. The mahogany clock that you just saw the video of, that was fairly costly, but you can have a good time and not spend a lot of money. And my next video, which is going to be called The Economical Clock, I'm actually going to make 10 of them, sort of on a mass production system. After all, if it worked for Henry Ford, it should work for me. And I hope you'll watch for that video. I've already got the parts ordered from Craft Time Clockery. They'll probably be arriving any day. And once they do, I'll get at it.